Never in her life had Emily imagined that her past would catch up with her like this. She had spent years hiding, running, protecting her daughter from a man who only wanted to destroy them. But today, her little girl had innocently exposed their biggest secret to the one person who could change everything. "Mommy, I know him! You showed me his picture!" the girl exclaimed, running toward Keanu Reeves. Emily's heart stopped. She grabbed her daughter's hand and turned to leave, her hands trembling. But Keanu had already noticed. He saw the fear in her eyes. Something was very, very wrong. Keanu Reeves was not your typical millionaire. While many celebrities flaunted their wealth, he preferred a life of quiet simplicity. He lived modestly, donated anonymously, and avoided the spotlight whenever he could. But there was one thing he never turned away from: helping those in need. He had been supporting a small orphanage for years, quietly funding their education, meals, and medical needs. No one ever knew the full extent of his generosity, and that's exactly how he liked it. But on this particular visit, something unexpected happened. A little girl recognized him, and her mother reacted with sheer panic. Keanu couldn't ignore it. He had no idea what he was about to uncover. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she clutched her daughter's small hand. The excitement in the little girl's voice had frozen her in place, but now every instinct screamed at her to run. "We need to go, sweetie, now." Her voice wavered as she forced a smile, trying to keep her panic hidden. Keanu, however, had already noticed. His sharp eyes didn't miss the way Emily's hands trembled, how her shoulders tensed as if bracing for something terrible. He had seen fear before, real gut-wrenching fear, and this was no different. "Is everything all right?" he asked gently, his tone careful, measured. Emily swallowed hard. "Yes, thank you. We were just leaving." She turned quickly, dragging her daughter along, but the little girl wasn't ready to go. She looked back at Keanu, her big brown eyes filled with innocence and admiration. "Mommy showed me your picture," she blurted out. "She said you help people." Emily flinched at her daughter's words. Her grip on the girl's hand tightened, as if she could somehow take back what had just been said. Her face turned pale, her breath hitched, and for a split second, Keanu saw something deeper than fear: desperation. Then, without another word, Emily pulled her daughter away and rushed toward the orphanage's exit. Keanu stood frozen, watching them disappear through the doors. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a mother in a hurry or a child saying something embarrassing. This was different. This was fear, genuine, paralyzing fear. The way Emily had reacted wasn't normal. The way she looked at him wasn't normal. People recognized Keanu all the time. Some were excited, some were in awe, some even cried when they met him. But this was something else. This was a woman who had just realized her carefully hidden world might be falling apart. He couldn't ignore it. He wouldn't. Keanu had spent years quietly helping people, always stepping in when he could. And right now, his instincts told him one thing: Emily needed help. The only question was, why was she so afraid? And who or what was she running from? Keanu couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. The way Emily had looked at him, like a trapped animal cornered with no escape, stayed with him long after she disappeared. He had seen fear before, but hers was different. It wasn't just fear of being recognized. It was something deeper, something that had been eating away at her for years. He needed to know more. Over the next few days, he began asking quiet, careful questions. He didn't want to cause any trouble, but he knew that when someone was in danger, the last thing they usually did was ask for help. First, he spoke with the orphanage director, an older woman who had been running the place for years. She knew every child, every volunteer, and every parent who walked through those doors. "Emily, she's been through a lot," the director said, her voice laced with concern. "Moved here a few months ago, keeps to herself, works long hours, barely talks to anyone, but she loves her little girl more than anything." Keanu nodded, waiting for her to continue. The director sighed. "She doesn't say much, but I can tell she's scared of something. She jumps when someone calls her name, flinches when people ask about her past, and she's always looking over her shoulder. Whatever she's running from, it's serious." Keanu's chest tightened. His gut had been right. Emily wasn't just nervous, she was terrified. He had to dig deeper. Without wanting to invade her privacy, He reached out to one of his close friends, a former private investigator. If Emily was in danger, he needed to know what or who was hunting her. A day later, the investigator called him back. His voice was grim. "You were right to be concerned, Keanu. I've found something, and it's bad." Keanu listened in silence as the story unraveled before him. Years ago, Emily had been married to a man named Victor Cole, a name that sent a chill down the investigator's spine. Victor wasn't just a bad husband. He was dangerous, ruthless, a man who built his life on intimidation, threats, and destruction. A master manipulator, Victor had trapped Emily in a marriage filled with fear and control. He had isolated her from friends, monitored her every move, and turned their home into a prison. Whenever she tried to fight back, he reminded her of the one thing that kept her from leaving: their daughter. "If you leave," he would say, his voice dripping with cruelty, "you'll never see her again." For years, Emily endured the torment, convinced there was no way out. But when Victor's violence escalated, when her daughter became a pawn in his sick game, she knew she couldn't stay any longer. One night, while Victor was out, she took her daughter, packed what little she could, and ran. She changed her name, moved across the country, disappeared. She thought she was safe. But now it seemed Victor had found her again. Keanu felt his jaw tighten as he listened to the investigator's final words. "He's been looking for her. And from what I can tell, he's not the kind of man who gives up easily." A heavy silence filled the room. Keanu took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had spent his entire life using his fortune to help others, to lift people up from struggles they couldn't escape on their own. This was no different. Emily had run as far as she could, but if Victor was closing in, she wouldn't be able to run forever. She needed help, real help. Keanu wasn't about to let her face this alone, but first he had to find a way to stop Victor. And for that, he needed a plan. Keanu didn't hesitate. He had seen too many people suffer in silence, trapped in situations they couldn't escape. Emily had run for years, but she wasn't running alone anymore. He needed to act fast. Through his network of contacts, Keanu started gathering information on Victor Cole. What he found was worse than he expected. Victor wasn't just an abusive ex-husband. He was a man with deep connections to organized crime, someone who had been evading the law for years. He had money, power, and people willing to do his dirty work. Emily's fear made perfect sense now. Victor had been searching for her since the day she disappeared, and now that he had a lead, he wasn't going to stop until he had her back under his control. Keanu knew there was only one way to stop him: expose everything. While Keanu worked on gathering evidence, Emily remained oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. She had returned to her daily routine, doing her best to act normal despite the constant anxiety that gnawed at her. Then one night, everything changed. She returned home from work, exhausted, her daughter's small hand nestled in hers. As she reached her apartment door, something felt off. The door was slightly ajar. Her stomach dropped. She knew someone had been inside. Heart pounding, she stepped in cautiously. The air was eerily still, but the moment she looked around, she knew her worst fear had come true. The drawers were pulled open. Papers were scattered on the floor. The closet doors left swinging. Someone had searched through everything. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps as she turned toward the kitchen table. That's when she saw it. A single sheet of paper. One sentence: "Oh, I found you." Emily's legs nearly gave out beneath her. A choked sob escaped her throat as she clutched her daughter to her chest. Victor had found them. She had been careful, so careful, but it wasn't enough. Her first instinct was to run, but where? He would always find them. She had spent years learning that lesson the hard way. A knock at the door made her spin around, her pulse hammering. She held her daughter close, backing away as panic took over. Then a voice, calm, familiar. "Emily, it's me. Open up." Keanu. She barely managed to unlock the door before collapsing into his arms, sobbing. "He found us," she gasped. "He was here. He's going to take her." I don't know what to do." Keanu didn't let her fall. He held her up, steady and firm. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice unwavering. "Pack your things. You're coming with me." Within minutes, Keanu had Emily and her daughter in his car, driving them to a secure location he had arranged through his contacts. "No one will find you here," he reassured her, but keeping them safe wasn't enough. Victor needed to be taken down for good. With his team of investigators, Keanu compiled evidence of Victor's illegal activities: money laundering, fraud, intimidation, and worst of all, human trafficking ties. He had been careful for years, but now Victor had made a mistake. By breaking into Emily's home, by threatening her, he had left a trail, and Keanu was going to use it to bury him. Over the next 48 hours, Keanu worked relentlessly with his team. He ensured that every piece of evidence was delivered to the right authorities, that no loophole would allow Victor to slip through the cracks. Then came the final step: the trap. Keanu knew Victor wouldn't stop searching. He knew the man was watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. So Keanu gave him one: a false lead, a staged location, a moment designed to make Victor believe Emily was vulnerable again. Victor took the bait. He arrived in the dead of night, his overconfidence blinding him to the fact that this time, he was the one being hunted. Within seconds, law enforcement swarmed in. Victor barely had time to react before he was surrounded, handcuffed, and thrown into the back of a police car. For the first time in years, Victor Cole was powerless. Keanu received the call just before dawn. "It's over," the investigator confirmed. "He's facing multiple charges. He's not getting out of this." Keanu exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. It was done. Emily and her daughter were finally free. When he arrived to tell her the news, Emily didn't say anything at first. Tears filled her eyes as she held her daughter close, unable to process the reality of it. After years of running, she could finally stop. She looked at Keanu, shaking her head in disbelief. "I don't even know how to thank you." Keanu smiled. "You don't have to." He turned to leave, as he always did, quietly stepping back into the shadows. But as he reached the door, a small voice stopped him. "Mr. Keanu?" He turned back to see the little girl staring up at him. She smiled. "I knew you would help us." Keanu chuckled, ruffling her hair before walking away, leaving behind yet another act of kindness in his quiet mission to make the world a better place. The sun had barely risen when Emily finally allowed herself to breathe. For years, she had lived in fear, never fully asleep, never fully safe. But now, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she wasn't running anymore. Victor was behind bars, for good. As she sat in the small but safe house Keanu had arranged for them, she watched her daughter sleep peacefully on the couch, her tiny chest rising and falling with every soft breath. The weight on Emily's shoulders, the one she had carried for so long, suddenly felt lighter. Keanu sat across from her, watching her process everything. His expression was calm, but there was something knowing in his eyes, as if he understood the exact kind of relief she was feeling. She had so many things she wanted to say, so many emotions swirling inside her. But when she finally found her voice, only one sentence came out: "I don't even know how to thank you." Keanu gave a small smile, shaking his head. "You don't have to." For him, this wasn't about gratitude. It never had been. He had spent years quietly helping people, making sure those who had nowhere else to turn didn't have to fight alone. He didn't do it for recognition. He didn't do it for praise. He did it because it was the right thing to do. And as much as he cared, this wasn't his story, it was Emily's. It was time for her to take back the life that had been stolen from her. She wiped at her tears, still in disbelief. "I spent so long thinking no one would ever help us, that no one cared." Keanu exhaled, glancing over at the sleeping child before looking back at Emily. "The world is full of good people," he said. "Sometimes it just takes a little longer to find them." She smiled, a real, genuine smile that she hadn't felt in years. Keanu stood, his job here done. He wasn't one for long goodbyes. He headed for the door, ready to slip away like he always did. But just as he reached it, a small voice stopped him. "Mr. Keanu." He turned back. The little girl stood there, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She smiled up at him, her tiny arms wrapped around the stuffed bunny she never slept without. "I knew you would help us." Keanu chuckled softly, crouching down to her level. "Yeah," she nodded. "Mommy said you help people, and you helped us." For a moment, he just looked at her, this innocent little girl who had spent most of her life in fear, yet still believed in goodness. He reached out, gently ruffling her hair. "Take care of your mom, okay?" She beamed, nodding eagerly. With that, Keanu stood and walked away, stepping out into the early morning light. Emily watched him go, tears brimming in her eyes once again. This man, this quiet stranger who had expected nothing in return, had just changed their lives forever. Keanu never looked back. He never needed to, because he knew somewhere in a small house where a mother and her daughter could finally sleep peacefully, his job was done. Some stories remind us that true heroes don't wear capes. They walk among us, changing lives in ways we may never see. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more incredible tales like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what's coming next.